Hi there. Every religion, every church has a concept of universal sorrow. We are trying to do good in a bad world, but then so is everybody trying to do good. In a bad world, and everybody shouts, God is great, before they murder and maim people that are bad, according to their estimation. And so it is that we come to antinatalism and Danny Shine from Social Experimentalist. And someone said, he's taking the piss, being an antinatalist, being part of the expiry party, which actually should be called the expiration party, not the expiry party, but never mind. He's taking the piss when he talks about making it illegal to have children. Because, of course, he doesn't really mean it. It's a sort of cry against humanity. Because as we all know, we live in a good world, a bad world, and a mixture in between. And as I said, everybody thinks they're doing good, even when they're not doing good, or the good has not been defined, which it actually has never been defined. So if the good has never been defined, then pretty much anything that you do can be defined by yourself as being the good. And everything everybody else does or feels or thinks can be the bad. And so we have our core beliefs, as they call them, and we act on those beliefs for the greater good, and often for the good of the people that we are trying to liberate. So I suppose in rolls the satirist, because Danny Shine knows that, in fact, you could actually have a raft of legislation to stop people having children, mostly on taxation. But since he thinks that taxation is a form of state robbery, then I don't think taxation would be the answer to limiting family. But in fact, it actually would be the most effective way, is simply to tax people more for having kids. um, and you pretty much see results like within a few years, really, or certainly within a generation, anyway. But that's not the point. Danny Shine, of course, is he follows in a tradition of satirists like Jonathan Swift, of course, who was the bitterest, most savage of all satirists. And of course, he was a misanthropist as well. He could see no good in humanity. Individual humans may be good or bad, but taken en masse, humanity is more bad than good and does more harm than good, as history has shown us, of course, over and over and over again. And I suppose that satire is bitter, and one mocks the mob, one mocks the people that are robotic and have been taken over, conditioned by the media, fueled by hatred and xenophobia. But not really, and as I say, as a satirist, of course, Danny Shine is unpopular. A lot of people hate him, but he also does have his fans. But I think basically, in general, it's better to be unpopular than to do nothing, and it's better to do something than to cry at home, and it's better uh, to cry at home than to self-harm, which is what a lot of people do. They become so disgusted at their own humanity that they actually harm themselves, which doesn't seem a very logical thing to do, really. Because, as I said, individuals may vary, and some individuals are better than other individuals, and some people are really, really good and sound people. And of course, it's on the basis of observing and interacting with these good people that we tend to have a positive attitude towards the world. whereas in fact, if you interacted with bad people most of the time, you'd have a very jaundiced look, a view of the whole world and of humanity, which the satirist normally does have a very jaundiced view of humanity. And but I think that the most important thing, to my mind, as someone who sort of looks at universal sorrow and at the sorrow of man's inhumanity to man and cruelty and exploitation and manipulation and predation, I think that when you look at it really in the round, you could say that what the world actually is illusory, and it all and meaningless, I suppose, as well. Meaningless in this world, but it might be possible to believe in a transcendent world or a transcendent state of mind, which really doesn't take into account good and bad at all. Not in the world, not in people. It doesn't even look at the world itself, which is a place of scarcity, from which greed and fear arise, of course. But you're not even looking at that. You're looking at some kind of transcendent state. It needn't be metaphysical. It could be like in the Buddhist sense of a state of mind, which really just transcends the world altogether. Of course, it's not a selfish thing, because you can look at the world and think it doesn't have to be like this. I could do something, and I suppose, as I said before, charity begins at home. So you could be nice to your spouse, or nice to your siblings, or nice to your children, and they could be nice to you as a parent. But of course, we're talking about ending the entire human race by not having any more children, sort of going on strike, as it were. I mean, you can imagine a sort of tyrannical God that demands that we go on producing children in order to be tortured and murdered and blown up and starved to death. Whereas you could say, I'm just going to go on strike. But other people say, oh no, it's good to be alive, and it's positive to bring new life into the world, new life, new potential, new hope. And that this is an argument against hopelessness. But if we're living in a world where at least you could say that good and bad are very much mixed together, and people are really not doing that much to unmix them because of the human condition. And when we try to unmix them and make everything good and make everybody happy, you actually end up making everybody more miserable. And you also have to force people to be free, which makes them really angry. So we're up against it when we think about this world. This world is so complicated. That's the other problem. It's illusory, but at worst, but at best, it is very complex. And every issue is nuanced, and every issue has its two sides, and you really, really can't make up your mind who's to blame and what's to blame, and how we have all arrived at this sorry situation. But I think underneath the satirist and underneath Danny Shine is an anger. It is a rage, a righteous rage against the unrighteous, against the violent, and against the exploitative and manipulative and predatory. There really is a rage, and I think it certainly is felt, in Jonathan Swift, and the Lilliputians and the Yahoos, and he actually, his wit and his satire are savage, so savage, in fact, that I think both conservatives in quotation marks and radicals in quotation marks actually see the savagery, and they see the human race as being lampooned and mocked, and yet also, there is the anger there. But I'm not. I think that basically it's about expectations. I mean, I think if you have a transcendent view of reality, if you think that this reality can be transcended, can be actually made into something different, or perceived as something different, then you have no great expectations. of humankind. I mean, you'll celebrate the good and the beautiful, but you don't expect the good and beautiful to last. You expect it to become ugly and evil, even though, and also one, I mean, even the vice versa, that evil and ugly can become beautiful and good, and that some people's evil and ugly is another person's beautiful and good, and vice versa. So, you know, in the end, you look at the world and you look at the human condition, and you just don't expect very much from it at all. And then you won't be disappointed and angry when your expectations are not met, you know, by the human race as a whole. And then also, I think one's got to look at individuals as well, rather than groups of people. It's a funny thing that when individuals become groups, they become a different animal altogether. They sort of get swallowed up by the beast, as it were, and they just, you know, you can get a group of people in a darkened room, and you can shine a point of light on a screen in front of this group of people, and then one person who's actually a stooge, they start saying that they can see the light bobbing up and down. And pretty soon, the whole group says that it can see the light bobbing up and down, but in actual fact, the light isn't moving at all. And this is called by cognitive psychologists conformance, and conformance psychology. So, I mean, you know, those individuals would never see the light bobbing up and down, but as a group they do. And it is a fascinating experiment, and there's loads of other experiments which seem to validate the view that people literally see things differently when they're in a group situation. And in order to conform to the group, they would just see whatever one person sees and communicates to the other people there. So I don't know what satire communicates. I don't know what is on the screen that a satirist is trying to make us see. The absurdity of the world, the absurdity of the human race and of the human condition, the hopelessness and meaninglessness of life, you know, and the fact that one should not expect anything good to come out of the human race whatsoever. And if something does come out, which is perceived to be good, then you sort of celebrate that. But then, can you celebrate it enough to justify, you know, having children and perpetrating the human race? I don't really know. Was the answer to that. But the satirists, like Jonathan Swift and Danny Shine, have already made up their minds, I suppose. They've already judged the issue, and they have found that the human race is by and large wanting in any sort of grace or beauty or goodness or anything else. So, um, you know, Danny Shine knows very well that there's a raft of legislation which could be brought out to limit family size, and should be, but he isn't really saying that. He's saying that the human race is really not worth perpetrating in any shape or form, and human consciousness can become extinct as far as he is concerned, and as far as the band of satirists that have come before him are concerned. So, having sort of stated this, you know, what else really is there to say? And as Bob Geldof, you know, sort of said, is this it? And the answer is yes, it is in fact it. This is all there is.